All right, well, lots to get stuck into here with the news. Political correspondent Cam Reddin joins me from the campaign trail. Cam, thanks for coming back on the U.S. Report. Tell us, where are you tonight?
Yeah, we're finally on the road, James, after talking to you in the studio for a couple of weeks. We're on the heart of Sydney at the moment, really in the CBD. George Street, the trams are whizzing by. The weather's been pretty miserable everywhere we've gone. We've gone from Canberra to Brisbane to Western Sydney. Now we're in the heart of Sydney. So certainly racking up the Ks in the early few days.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Cam, you've been following Peter Dutton's campaign. And how is the whole weekend shaped up so far? What's the vibe on the ground?
Well, it's interesting, James, because I think for 3 years you've seen this slow rebuilding of the Liberal team where after the defeat in 2022, the momentum was kind of trending in one way. It was all up for 3 years. In the last 2 weeks is where things seem to have turned a little bit. And I know we'll touch on Newspoll in a minute. You mentioned that in your introduction as well. This will really be the test now for Peter Dutton because these first opening days, there have been a few disruptions with the protesters. There have been a lot of events held behind closed doors. I think yesterday in the brewery, a closed-door event with Liberal Party faithful in his event. Today, a little bit more outdoors in the electorate of Fowler, but again behind closed doors at a factory in McMahon and then at a mosque a little later this afternoon in Macarthur. So now it feels like, James, the momentum is not necessarily on Peter Dutton's side. He's now behind in the polls for the first time in many months. This will be the test. It's been a slowish start, just getting their feet under the desk of this campaign. We can expect, I think, to kick up a gear from tomorrow when the first working day of this campaign begins. Well,
that's right. And just to get back to that poll, we've seen a 2-point swing, and now it's 51-49 in the Newspoll, favouring Labor. Do you expect, though, that there are going to be new policies that are going to be coming out of the Liberal Party, the next couple of weeks here? And I'm wondering, why aren't they dropping these policies sooner?
We've been asking this for a long time, James, and one person suggested to me that perhaps they've left their run a little bit late here because the policies they're putting forward are complex. The gas industry is not a simple thing to digest. People can understand a fuel tax cut. They get that. People understand their income tax. And I'm not saying people can't learn about these things, but when you're on the booths, when you're door knocking, when you're out meeting people, it's a slightly more complex policy to explain, getting gas in. You can look at divestiture, for example. Today, the Prime Minister's message was about outlawing price gouging. Now, the ACCC didn't find necessarily that price gouging was happening in the supermarkets, but it's a lot easier to say we're going to make this illegal than it is to say, well, we're going to look at divestiture, which means breaking up the big supermarkets, which means increasing competition. So that really is the narrative difficulty, I think, for the coalition at the moment. The lines are a little more complex. And that's not to say that one is a better policy or the other. But ultimately, James, as you know, this is partly a messaging game. What can you tell people in the 30 seconds they might be walking down the street that will stay with them? And I think even in these opening couple of days, that might be proving slightly more difficult for the coalition.
Yeah, but, let's be honest here. The Albanese government, Labor, they've got some troubles of their own when it comes to policies, particularly energy, which has basically been a millstone around their neck for their entire first term of government. Anthony Albanese fronted ABC's Insiders this morning, and he dodged questions about energy prices and what happened to that $275. Take a look at this.
Household rebate that you extended in the budget runs out at the end of this year. What happens then? Do prices go up?
Well, we very consciously, David, have provided now 3 lots of energy relief.
But I'm asking at the end of this year, what happens? Do prices go up when that runs out?
We've dealt with that in a practical way.
If that international pressure is still there, you might have to extend the rebate beyond this year?
Well, no, what we do is we focus on the budget, on immediate needs.
I'm asking I think a lot of households will want to know what's going to happen to their power bill and what happens at the end of this year. The government hasn't produced any sort of modelling or indication as to what's going to happen with energy prices if you're returned.
What we are providing is $150 relief. We're extending that relief.
But prices, what happens to prices at the end of this year?
From that. David, what we have done is to provide that support.
No, but I'm asking you right
modelling,
now, Prime Minister.
There's no processing, and I've told you,
but
David,
just one more time, will prices go up at the end of this year?
David, what we will have is that $150 of relief that we're providing for people now, the 3rd lot of relief.
Cam, it strikes me as pretty shocking that even at this late date here, Labor doesn't have any good answers about what has happened to power prices and what they're going to do about them.
Yeah, I asked that same question to Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister, when I bumped into him at an event in Fowler a couple of hours ago, James, and it was very much the same. They go straight to talking about Peter Dutton. The opposition leader even suggesting today, and look, we know both sides are a little bit bruised or wary of the risk of committing a dollar figure after what happened with the 275 promise in 2022 from Labor. Peter Dutton's now suggesting there might be a percentage target or a range perhaps that the coalition looks to target when it comes to how much power prices will come down for people rather than committing a dollar figure for it. We're told that analysis is coming in the next couple of days, so I think that'll be one to watch for. At the end of the day, James, people want to know where their household bills are going. It's been up for some years now. Are they going to come down? How much are they going to come down? When are they going to come down? And neither side is really putting a key benchmark to that at this point.
Yeah, no, I think they're both feeling pretty burnt about this. But Cam, I also want to get you to walk us through this referendum the opposition leader keeps talking about recognizing Indigenous people in the Constitution and extending terms to 4-year fixed terms for government. This seems like a bit of an odd thing to do because it's not really going to bring down anybody's power prices. It's not going to fix grocery bills. In a cost of living campaign, this seems like a very inside baseball kind of Canberra Beltway sort of thing.
I'm very surprised we're talking about referendums, James, because we know that after The Voice, Peter Dutton noted that he didn't think there was really an appetite for a referendum anytime soon. Since then, though, in those 18 months or so, he's floated or lent into the proposed idea of 3 potential referendums, one on deportation, one on, now we're talking about 4-year terms, and one also on Indigenous recognition in the Constitution. Not, by the way, committing to take any of those to the campaign, whereas if they win the coalition, those referendums will happen. That's not the promise here. He's simply leaning into the idea that if there was bipartisan support on any of those, that's when he might support a referendum. The Prime Minister, keep in mind, he's ruled out holding any referendums in the next term of Parliament, no matter what they're on. There is bipartisan support for 4-year terms, James, and I think there'll be a lot of support for that in the community even as well, but it's just not a top 10, maybe even not a top 50 issue for voters. So it might get a little mention here or there, but I don't think that referendums will get a serious look in this next term of government.
Yeah, and finally, Cam, before I let you go, I just want to ask you very quickly here. One of the things that we've seen Labor really leaning into here is trying to get influencers to, back the campaign or going on, various podcasts and like Abby Chatfield. And we even had this bizarre moment in Parliament this week.
Yeah.
Delulu. Can use it in a sentence.
I must be Delulu, but I feel like he was giving me the eyes.
Delusional.
Perfect.
Boom.
Yep.
Like
Okay, next one.
Peter Dutton on nuclear power costs. Delulu.
I dare you to drop that in
I
the
can
speech.
do that?
Delulu with no Salulu.
We've got budget week next week. Listen up. Be a in-joke in-joke between the 3 of us and all of your
And the
Punters.
crew.
The 3 of us and the punters.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they are Delulu with no Salulu.
Cam, this strikes me as really embarrassing. What do you think, though? I mean, you're in a slightly younger demographic than I am, perhaps I'll admit. This seems like it's a bit condescending, you would think, to kind of the under 30 voters. What's your take on it?
Well, I'm just under 30, James, and I had no idea what any of that meant, so I had to ask one of the younger crew in our office to decipher it for me as well. But look, I mean, this is the new age of campaigning, isn't it? It's TikTok, it's memes, it's slang and lingo that younger people use. I think a lot of the people that get these sort of images online or listen to these podcasts might not even be of voting age, so that's one thing to be aware of. But look, it is, I suppose, an area where not as many people are getting their news through the radio, through television, through print medium. It's through social media. So the leaders probably both know they've got to get to them somehow, James. And if it's one extra vote by making a good gag, Jason Clare's tried a few of them this morning at least. Maybe that's one vote that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, and finally I want to ask you, too, about just all of these sorts of heckling incidents and the bird dogging and all of that. We saw that young man ask the Prime Minister about immigration. We saw all of the bird dogging of Peter Dutton at these events. Is this going to change the way that our politicians, both the opposition leader and the Prime Minister, campaign? And one of the things, Cam, that always strikes me about Australian politics, having covered the White House a long time ago in the United States, is the relative ease with which our politicians, mix with the people and don't have these huge bubbles of motorcades and so on. Are you worried that we're going to see more of that kind of bubble develop around our politicians?
Yeah, look, I was in the room for both of those when they happened to Peter Dutton, James, and I asked him whether he would change his strategy as a result. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. Clearly, though, even in our experience today, that security, which is already tight, has tightened further. You mentioned it's one of the great things of Australian democracy, but election campaigns. Leaders go to pubs, they go to cafes, they walk the street, they go to community fairs, and you can stand shoulder to shoulder, talk with your leader of your nation, perhaps. And you'd hate to see any of that scaled back. Thankfully, it's been a protest-free day today, James, but security that was already tight, I can say, I think is tightening still. And there are questions being asked about how on earth those protesters managed to get so close, shoulder to shoulder, with Peter Dutton at one stage.
Cam Reddin, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me. Stay dry out there on a drizzly George Street.